Chapter 64. In the Netherwater Manor, Black Robes, White Bones. Yet on the shore there was still not a single soul behind them. Shilian had kept Fangshin at hand during their entire trek, and the moment he saw the reflection he stabbed behind him. But while his attack had clearly pierced the black shadow, it felt like he had stabbed a ball of water that broke up into ripples and disappeared on the spot. Huacheng cocked his head and knitted his brows as he stared in the direction where the black shadow had disappeared. Soon after, more and more shadowy figures appeared in the water's reflection. Their stark, ghastly pale faces and hands were the only illumination that the Black Knight offered. Shilian kept up the assault with his sword and shouted, "General Pei, go to the water! Look at the reflection! The water can reveal the creatures!" Those little ghosts normally wouldn't be able to even approach a heavenly official. But things were different in the demon lair. Pei Ming hadn't been able to see the enemy, but now that he understood what was happening, he stared at the water's surface and easily felled all the ghostly shadows surrounding him with but 2 swings of his sword. Shiwuru also finally noticed the strange reflection, and he knelt by the water to shout into the lake, "Qingxuan, are you there?" The black water and black iron prison blurred together, making it hard to make out details aside from that single white hand. Suddenly, a face appeared between the iron bars. It was Shi Qingxuan. He didn't seem to be able to see Shiwuru kneeling outside the prison, and his expression was one of absolute terror. He clutched onto the iron bars with both hands and desperately tried to squeeze his head out. It looked like he was crying for help, yet not a single sound passed through, and his pleas were short-lived. Several wizened hands grabbed him, seized his head, his face, his neck, his shoulders, and then forcibly dragged him down. Shiwuru cursed at the sight. Pei Ming pulled him back before he could leap into the water himself. "Watermaster Xiong, you can't. How do you know this isn't a trap? You can't manipulate the waters of the South Sea. Even as a water god, you're at someone else's mercy when you enter their water territory." Shiwuru patted his shoulder and said simply, "Then help me by standing guard out here." With that, he pushed him away and leapt into Blackwater Lake. Once he submerged, he did not resurface. "Watermaster Xiong!" Pei Ming called out. But he couldn't follow. He knew there was most likely a boundary at the bottom of this lake. Much like mechanisms in ancient tombs, outsiders could open the gates and intrude, but once they were inside, the doors would slam shut. They couldn't be opened from within, and the grave robbers would be trapped and left to die. It was hard to say whether this boundary worked in a similar manner. "General Pei, don't go after him," Shilian called out. "There's a corpse right by your feet. Take it and hurry back to the beach. Use it to build a coffin and prepare for evacuation. I'll go myself." "Your Highness, are you in fighting shape?" Pei Ming asked. "This place has sealed off nearly all your spiritual powers. We're about the same now, and I have more experience than you when it comes to fighting with bare fists." Pei Ming glanced at Huacheng, who was standing next to Shilian, and recalled that he could float on the water's surface. The two of them would be much more useful than him in this situation. So without further argument, he picked up the little ghost corpse and rushed back into the woods. Shilian turned to Huacheng. "Sanlang, will you lend me a little spiritual power again? Just a little tiny bit is enough." Without a word of complaint, Huacheng gently patted the small of Shilian's back. A giant beam of white light sprung forth from Fangshin, and when Shilian swung, every little ghost surrounding the lake was killed by the sweep. Shilian was speechless for a moment, then simply sheathed his sword. "I'm off!" The two jumped into the water together. There wasn't anything strange at the bottom of Blackwater Lake besides abnormally cold lake water. In fact, this water was much more normal than the strange, ship-sinking waters of the Blackwater Demon Lair. One could float in it no differently than in an ordinary lake. Puzzled, Shilian kept swimming downward. It didn't take long for him to reach the bottom, but there weren't any strange mechanisms, and he didn't see Lord Windmaster or Lord Watermaster. Brows knitted, he mused on the matter for a moment before swimming back up. Upon surfacing, he gasped a few breaths and wiped his face. Once his sight was clear, he noticed that a different shore stretched out before him. An iron prison loomed over Blackwater Lake. It was the same one that had been reflected in the lake's waters. Other than the prison, everything on the shore was exactly the same as he remembered. The oppressive quiet made the atmosphere all the more haunting. Shiwuru was already ashore, angrily smashing the giant lock on the prison gates with a big rock. He was the heavenly official who controlled water, but he had entered the domain of another watermaster, and couldn't call forth the water he ruled. He was like a ferocious beast that had been defanged and declawed. The moment Shiwuru saw Shilian and Huacheng climb ashore, his eyes lit up, and he raised his hand to beckon them over. "A martial god! Perfect timing! Quick, use your martial god ways to take care of this!" Maybe now everyone will understand the benefits of having a martial god around, Shilian thought. He approached wordlessly and unleashed a kick, which nearly cracked the lock in two. Another kick, and the prison gates opened. Shiwuru rushed inside, crying out, "Ching!" Before he even made it through the door, a mob came rushing out, wailing and howling hellishly. "Oh! Ah!" The people were disheveled and unkempt, emaciated and gaunt. Their ragged clothes covered nothing and revealed rows of ribs. They were so filthy it was like they hadn't bathed in over a decade. Their eyes were glazed as they stomped their feet, swung their hands randomly, and grabbed and beat at their own chests. They roared and cried incoherently, creating an exceedingly horrifying scene as they streamed out like a wave of polluted water. Shiwuru was left petrified in shock. However, they were simply trying to escape. They didn't stick around to harass anyone. Even if Shiwuru was momentarily stunned, he didn't actually care about what they did and continued his charge into the building. Aching! Before he could even make it a few steps, he staggered so hard that he almost fell. The ground was extremely slippery. There was an indescribable putrid smell emanating from within the iron prison. Shilian could even smell it from outside, and he held his breath. Shiwuru covered his nose and mouth with his sleeve and continued his charge inside, finally able to yell the full name. Qingxuan! It was pitch black within the prison, and from all around them came the sound of weeping and strange whispered murmurs. Moments later, a weak voice came. Ugh! In the deepest part of the iron prison, Shi Qingxuan was slumped against the only wall with a high window. The moonlight leaking through it illuminated him and blanched him white as a sheet. He was surrounded by a group of filthy wretches. Some had festering sores covering their entire bodies. Some were snorting like pigs, and some were pecking for grain like chickens. Some were hugging Shi Qingxuan, wailing and declaring him their baby. All of them were clearly insane. Shi Qingxuan had once been an esteemed heavenly official. Never before had he fallen to such a state. Shiwuru stormed forward and shot a blast from his hand. Get lost! What in the hell are these ghosts? Though he and Shi Qingxuan resembled each other, their bearing was completely different. Shiwuru's spiritual powers might be greatly diminished right now, but that only doubled his overpowering presence, and it made the madmen scramble away in fear. Shilian couldn't help but feel sympathy, and Shi Qingxuan also chided, Don't attack them! They're not ghosts, they're living humans! This was true. Although they looked more ghostly than ghosts, they were all human. Shilian was shocked by the sight. Why would Blackwater Demon Xuan lock all these people up here? He wondered. Shiwuru, however, had no such regard for their suffering. Clutching the longevity lock pendant in one hand, he grabbed hold of Shi Qingxuan's arm with the other. How did you get here? Where are you hurt? Shi Qingxuan was certainly dirty, but he didn't seem injured aside from a cut on his leg that was bleeding a bit. I don't know how we got here. A wave surged and knocked us out. When we woke up, we were already imprisoned. This is just a scratch. It's nothing serious. Mingshong's injuries are more severe. Only then did the others notice that Ming Yi was lying on the ground nearby. He looked ashen, but not from displeasure. Patches of purple and blue mottled his face. What happened to Lord Earthmaster? Shilian asked. I think he was bitten by those creatures in the sea, Shi Qingxuan replied. Those bonefish have green moss growing on their teeth and spikes, and they're poisonous. I applied all the medicine I had onto him, but, Shilian crouched to take a closer look at him, but the disgusting stench that permeated the air almost knocked him out. He looked around. There were wooden buckets filled with swill placed around the prison, and they emanated a musty, putrid smell. There was also the rotten stink of sores and blood and the horrifying odor of chamber pots that Shilian suspected hadn't been emptied for months. Shiwuru's tolerance ran dry. Such a revoltingly bad taste. It seems this ship-sinking Blackwater has little class to speak of. Qingxuan, let's go. He pulled Shi Qingxuan to his feet and started to drag him out, but Shi Qingxuan spoke up. I'm fine, no need to assist me. He then helped Ming Yi upright, and supported him as they slowly exited the iron prison. However, it was easier to come than to go. The boundary passage in Blackwater Lake was sealed shut. They dove into the waters and surfaced a few times, but the scenery never changed, proving that they were being held inside the boundary of Blackwater Lake, unable to leave. Where's General Pei? Shi Qingxuan asked. I had Pei Sheng stay on the other side. He should be trying to think of a way in as well, Shiwuru replied. I told General Pei to build a coffin boat, so once we're out we can evacuate that in there, Shilian said. If he finishes that boat, he could also go back to report on the situation and then return for us, Shiwuru said. However, Ming Yi was wounded. They might not be able to wait that long. While they weren't sure how powerful the poison was, it would still be better to leave as soon as possible. After some contemplation, Shilian said, Blackwater Demon Xuan might live in seclusion out here, but surely he must leave sometimes. He wouldn't want to cross the entire Blackwater Demon lair every time he wants to go out, right? Yes, that's a very good point, Shiwuru said. There must be a spot on this island where we can cast a teleportation array. Shiwuru hadn't particularly cared for Shilian at first, but he looked at him differently now that they were shouldering hardships together, and he'd seen Shilian save Shi Qingxuan time and time again. Thus, he agreed to Shilian's suggestion without argument. Ming Yi weakly raised his hand, and Shi Qingxuan asked, Mingshong, is there something you want to say? Ming Yi didn't speak, only raised his hand slightly higher. It seemed like he was trying to conserve his strength. The others looked in the direction he was pointing, and saw a gloomy, black building standing in the depths of the forest. Ming-Yi dropped his arm and said, voice raspy, "That place. What's it for, do you know?" "No," Shilian said. "We didn't see it on the way here." Shiwudu squinted. "That must be the Netherwater Manor of Blackwater Demon Xuen." That was the rumored name of Blackwater Demon Xuen's residence. That conclusion made, he declared, "Let's go." He started toward the manor, shockingly fearless of any retribution. Although it seemed impetuous and rude, what other choice did they have under their current circumstances? One could say they had been going around in circles in someone's backyard, and now they were about to break into their home through the front door. "Sanang, you don't need to come along if this is awkward for you," Shilian whispered to Huacheng. Huacheng's face was serious as he replied, "Quicken your pace, Gaga. Get out of here as soon as possible." Shilian nodded and didn't say any more. Huacheng seemed wary, but not about the master of this land. Shilian could tell it was something else. He kept feeling that something was off, and the thought of all the little questions they'd accumulated made him uneasy. The group hiked through the forest, paying no mind to the band of madmen that was now running wild and free. Finally, they arrived at the haunting black building. They only noticed upon their arrival that the Netherwater Manor was actually a large, majestic palace. In fact, its build was very similar to the peerlessly splendid palaces of Wind and Water. The group ascended the countless steps and stood before the tightly shut gates. Shilian knocked. "Pardon the intrusion," he brightly called out. "It is purely by accident that we have most bluntly offended you by our indiscretion. We deeply apologize." No one answered. Collecting himself, Shilian casually pushed open the palace doors. Shilian knew from years of experience that even if there was something waiting for them inside, it wouldn't pop out and greet them the moment the door was opened. But it seemed today he would have to eat his own words. The first thing he saw was something petrifying. Sitting at the center of the grand, spacious entrance hall was someone dressed all in black, their face snow white. It was a skeleton. Wham! Shilian immediately shut the door. Did I perhaps open it incorrectly? Something like that usually doesn't show itself so quickly. He wanted to start over and try his greeting again, but Shiwudu had already walked past him and pushed open the doors with a humph. "We're already here, so what does it matter if he doesn't welcome us?" The group slowly stepped into the palace and cautiously approached the skeleton dressed in black. Shilian examined it carefully. To whom do these bones belong? Why are they enshrined here? Ming-Yi knitted his brows. "Wasn't General Pei left behind? It's not him, is it?" It was possible. Shiwudu was slightly rattled and looked the skeleton over a few more times before he could refute the idea. "I don't believe so. The bone structure is flatter than General Pei's." "Wait," Shi Jingxuan said all of a sudden. The group looked at him, and Shi Jingxuan continued. "Isn't it obvious? This is the Netherwater Manor. Naturally, the only one that could be worshipped inside the Netherwater Manor is..." Shilian understood what he was trying to say, but he dismissed the idea just as quickly. "Blackwater Demon Xuen? That's impossible." Shilian gazed at Huacheng. "For those in the Ghost Realm, their ashes are their life source, and also their fatal weakness. Why would he put something so important on display?" Huacheng had told him this when they first met. While he stated the fact quite seriously, for some reason, his mind unconsciously wandered to the other thing Huacheng had said about ashes. Huacheng was watching him intently, and Shilian lost himself for a moment. He twisted his gaze away and softly cleared his throat. "Then, who could these bones belong to?" Shi Jingxuan wondered. The group surrounded the eerie skeleton to investigate it, and Shilian was the first to voice his findings. "First, it's a man. We see that," the group said. "Second, the man's hands and feet must have been fairly dexterous, particularly his fingers," Shilian continued. "He likely practiced some sort of martial art, but his skill may not have been strong. Exceptional martial artists start training at a young age, and their bone structures wouldn't be like this." In contrast, Shiwudu only gave the skeleton a cursory look before he turned away. "As long as it's not in our way, it doesn't matter who it is. Lord Earthmaster, where do you think we can cast the teleportation?" Before he could finish, the skeleton raised its head and lunged at him without warning. Fortunately, Shilian reacted swiftly and felled it with a single chop of his hand. The skeleton clattered to the ground in a heap of shattered bones. "Aga!" Shi Jingxuan exclaimed. Of the 5 present, Shilian was the only martial god, and Huacheng would never help or protect anyone aside from Shilian, so Shilian had now become quite important. Although Shiwudu had just been attacked, he remained fairly collected. He had only taken a single step back even after an attempt was made on his life. "What's with this skeleton? Does it still have a soul lingering within?" Shilian crouched to rifle through and inspected the bones, then shook his head. "That's weird." "What's weird?" Shiwudu asked. Shilian rose to his feet. "It doesn't have a single breath of its soul left. If it did, we would have noticed strange disturbances when we approached." "If that's the case, Then how did it manage to pounce at me? Shiwudu asked. Humming for a moment, Shilian answered, I think it's terminal lucidity. Shi Qingxuan was puzzled. Terminal lucidity? Doesn't that only happen to the living? Those on the verge of death are still alive, I guess. The dead experience it as well, Shilian explained. The seventh day is a form of terminal lucidity, when the souls of the deceased return to greet family. In fact, it's the same for anyone, the living, the dead, and all in between. I think Lord Watermaster must have provoked it, which was why it gathered the last of its strength and made a move. Because his theories made sense, Shiwudu valued his words more and more. Then, in the opinion of your highness, what was the provocation? It was either something you said or something on your person, Shilian said. What did I say? Shiwudu wondered. Mingyi blew out a breath. As long as it's not in our way, it doesn't matter who it was. Shi Qingxuan scratched his head, puzzled. Was there something wrong with that? Could our friend here have a violent temper? Nothing conclusive could come from further discussion, so Shilian said. In any case, the soul has dissipated. Let's drop the matter. He collected the remains of the bones and settled them upon the altar anew, then clapped his hands together in prayer and bowed a few times. Shi Qingxuan came over as well and randomly bowed a few times, following his lead. After that was settled, the five of them wandered the Netherwater Manor. There wasn't anyone around. It seemed the legendary Blackwater demon Xuan wasn't home. The Water Manor's structure was complex, with many branching side chambers both big and small. However, there was one particularly hidden and cramped. There were strange spells scrawled upon its doors, traces left over from the use of the teleportation array. It would appear there was a place where the teleportation array could be used on Blackwater Island. In that place was this tiny side chamber. Setting up a room to serve as a dedicated connection point drained a lot less spiritual power than drawing a completely new array every time. Considering they didn't have much spiritual power available at the moment, this was perfect. Mingyi was the expert, and he was able to grasp the chamber's specifics with a glance. This array only allows one-way transport. Shilian understood, meaning that it can only send forth. One cannot come here from elsewhere, correct? Mingyi nodded. It further reduces the spiritual power required. Isn't that exactly what we need? Shi Qingxuan said. We just want to leave, so this is great. Let's get out of here before the Master of Blackwater discovers us. Hauling the Earthmaster along with one arm, Shi Qingxuan moved to push open the doors with his other hand. Stop! There's a trap! Mingyi exclaimed sharply. Shi Qingxuan stumbled back a meter when he heard this. What trap? Mingyi was dragged along with him, stunned speechless for a moment. He gestured for Shi Qingxuan to help him approach again, and they walked through the door once more. There, Mingyi thoroughly inspected the spells scrawled upon it. It's a trap, he stated firmly. Arrays drawn in this chamber can only send one person away at a time. That's a thing? Shi Qingxuan exclaimed. And then, what happens if two people go together? You'll find they've been crushed into one person upon reaching their destination, Mingyi answered coldly. Among those present, only Mingyi had advanced knowledge on this topic. The rest of the group consisted of one water god, one wind god, and one martial god, none of them particularly knowledgeable in this subject. Shilian's first reaction was to look at Huacheng. He was intently staring at that array, but he didn't voice any objections. It seemed Mingyi wasn't lying. Shilian hummed. If that's really the case, then any ignorant intruders attempting to activate this array to escape would have an atrocious end. A trap indeed. The skies rumbled outside. Twisted lightning crawled across the gloomy clouds and flashed white and blue upon the faces inside Netherwater Manor. They looked around like a congregation of menacing ghosts. The group exchanged looks of dismay. It's another, Qingxuan said. Shiwudu's face darkened, and he did not respond. But everyone knew that this was his heavenly tribulation in pursuit of him again. Pei Ming's unintentionally ominous words faintly echoed in Shilian's mind again. Watermaster Shung, you're really unlucky this time.